Good morning, Miss Scott.
Good morning. Good morning, sir.
It's good to see you here in person.
Thank you, sir. It's very nice to be back. This morning, sir, I am going to be giving a presentation on the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre from the date that it was established in 1970 until the time when Dr. Frank Bolton took over as the director in September 1990. And you will recall, sir, that we heard evidence from Dr. Bolton last week about what happened in the centre from the time that he arrived in September 1990. The first director of the Wessex Centre was Dr. Donald Smith, and he took the directorship from the establishment of the centre in 1970 until stepping down in around, Dr. Bolton thought, about 1988 or 1989. We don't have a precise date for that. And what Dr. Bolton told us and what we see reflected in the documents is that having stepped down, Dr. Smith was persuaded to remain for a couple of days a week as a locum medical manager, and that is how he describes himself in some of the documentation that we see towards in 1989. And then it looks as though he stepped away entirely at the end of April 1990. And we were certainly told by Dr. Bolton that by the time he arrived in September 1990, there had been no director in place for a little while. He wasn't sure how long, but it looks like that period was May to September 1990. The centre itself is based in Southampton, and it covered a region which included Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Dorset and part of Wiltshire. And by 1984, we see from the documents that it served 11 district blood banks. In terms of population, again, the documents tell us that it served a population of about 2.14 million in 1980, and that was rising through the 1980s to 2.3 million in 1987. And by 1989, it's suggested that a better estimate was 2.8 million. If we could have, Sally, a document CBLA 40391, we can have a look at a very simplified picture of the area that it covers. This document is the agenda and then the minutes of a meeting of the Blood Transfusion Centre directors, regional scientific advisors and Haemophilia Centre directors for the supra-regional territory for which Oxford Haemophilia Centre had responsibility, and it's from a meeting that took place on the 26th of July 1976, and we're looking here at the agenda. But if we could turn please to page 3 of this document, we can see a map. And if we look down at the bottom there, we can see that the Wessex RHA is depicted there. And we know from the documents that the RHA and the Regional Transfusion Centre were not identical, but that's the area we're more or less looking at. The Transfusion Centre did not cover the whole of the Regional Health Authority. And if we then turn over, please, to page 5, we get a little bit of information about who was attending this meeting. And we can see, as we look down the list of attendees, that we've got an attendee from the Trelaw Haemophilia Centre. So that was one of the haemophilia centres served by the Wessex Transfusion Centre, Dr. Kirk, and we've also got there Dr. Rainsford. And then moving down the list, we can see there Dr. Stern from the Department of Pathology in Bournemouth, again, another hospital and area served by the Transfusion Centre. And again, moving down, we see Dr. O'Brien from Portsmouth, again, served by the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre. And then if we turn over the page, We can see under Regional Blood Transfusion Centre Director attendees, we see Dr. Smith from Wessex. And then at the bottom, or near the bottom, we see apologies for absence, and we see the name there of Dr. Chisham, who is from Southampton, again, one of the centres, haemophilia centres served by the Wessex Transfusion Centre. And then, so if we turn over to page 8 of this document, we see recorded a discussion and a contribution from Dr. Smith at the top of that page. Dr. Smith said that he supplied cryoprecipitate to hospitals in Newport, Dorchester, Salisbury and Winchester. These are not haemophilia centres, but Dr. Smith felt confident that the patients were well cared for at these hospitals. Dr. Smith said that he would ask at the next regional haematology meeting to see if the centres should be listed and designated as associate haemophilia centres. And then the view is expressed by Dr. Rainsford and Dr. Scott that it's not generally desirable for patients to be treated at hospitals which were not haemophilia centres.
Just on that, if we go back to the cast list on the page
5.
Whereas Dr. Kirk is shown as being at the Trelaw Haemophilia Centre, the address given for Rainsford, who makes the point that you should only be treated at a centre, is shown as coming from the Lord Mayor Trelaw College. So he's appears to give his address as the college, not the centre.
Yes.
It just, I don't know if anything turns on that point. It's one I'll have to consider in due course, perhaps.
Yes.
But thank you.
Then if we turn to another document to give us a snapshot about what, in terms of what was happening at the centre in 1980, it's NHBT 0110056. And this is the annual report of the Wessex Transfusion Service for 1980. And we can see in the introduction it says this service was set up by the Wessex Regional Hospital Board in 1970. The region had previously received its blood supplies from the Bristol and South London transfusion services, and then some 55,825 donations were collected, processed and just distributed in the first full year. At the reorganisation of the NHS in 1974, it was decided that the Bath and Swindon health districts would continue to be served by Bristol and Oxford transfusion centres. The distance involved made this a logical decision. This, of course, means that the Wessex Transfusion Service is serving approximately 2.14 million of Wessex's 2.74 million population. And then the next paragraph, the second half of that paragraph, as will be seen in the body of this report, the total number of donations collected in 1980 was 86,926, with the plasma from about 38,000 going to factor 8 and plasma protein fraction production. And then in 1974, the service changed from bottles to collection of donations into plastic packs. And then if we go down to the bottom of this page in the last paragraph, halfway through that paragraph, we see that a mobile centre was commissioned and had its first session on Monday, 1st of September 1980. If we go over the page then, please, we get told a little bit about the buildings and so on. First paragraph, the increase in blood collection and handling has exerted considerable pressure on the space available in the transfusion centre. 2 small extensions have been carried out, one to the bleed suite, the other a prefabricated Class 1 clean room, and we'll see reference to that in some of the documents we look at later. And a further 2-storey extension is planned for 1981 to 1982. Then if we go down to the last paragraph, we can see that it said that the amount of factor AHF, which is provided by the Blood Products Laboratory, is insufficient to meet the regional needs. And the reason for this is the existence of the Lord Mayor Trelaw Haemophilia Centre at Alton. Consequently, some 3.1 million units of commercial AHF will have been purchased in the current financial year. It's hoped that our plans for expanding our plasma collection will make significant reductions in this. And then we can see at the bottom some of the names of the senior staff team. We've got Dr. Smith, medical director, Dr. Barnes, his deputy medical director, and we'll see quite a lot of correspondence from him later on. And then we've got Mr. Allison, senior chief MLSO, and Mr. Dudderidge, regional donor organisation, with Mr. Grundy as administrator. So we know from other documents that by 1984, the centre were holding 18 sessions a week and collecting 99,000 donations per year. And for the transcript, the reference for that is NHBT 20108221_009. We don't need to go to that. And we also know that by 1987, there was a plasmapheresis panel, and there seemed to be a preference at the Wessex Centre for manual pheresis rather than automatic. Turning then to high-risk donors, and again, we don't need to go to this, but I'll read this for the transcript. There is a reference in a executive committee meeting note for the Haemophilia Society of the 9th of December 1971, which for the transcript is HSOC 0029691_142. And the note says this: Dr. Smith has been very pleased at the interest shown in what he was doing. And you will recall, we'll see, of course, that this is a year after the centre has opened. And he goes on to say, the crews of many ships are volunteering as blood donors. Now, it's not clear whether those are naval ships or other kinds of ships, but there is reference in this document, which I think is worth going to, NHBT 0108948. So there is reference in this document we're just about to look at to naval donors. And we can see here it's it looks like an internal note from Dr. Smith dated 27th June 1974. And he says, please could you ask the team clerks, particularly at naval sessions, to inquire if there is any history of jaundice, even if the donor has previously donated. Anyone with a history of jaundice will not be accepted, but I will always write to them and explain that they can go on our research panel. So this document suggests that there were certainly naval sessions, and we'll see some correspondence in due course between the centre and a naval hospital. And I will come back to the question of the donor selection and criteria in relation to those who have had a history of jaundice. We can also see from documents that there were collections from prisons. Could we have, please, DHSC 010020_045? So this is a letter from the 9th of May 1972 to Dear Doctor, and we can see it's from Dr. Smith, and it's about a particular patient, or donor, I should say. This donor attended one of our blood collection sessions at Camp Hill Prison on the Isle of Wight. Our routine test showed that he had a positive HAA test, and this was confirmed by the Portsmouth Public Health Laboratory. These facts were then communicated to the governor of the prison and the prison medical officer, who decided that for medical reasons, personality difficulties, it would be inadvisable to let Mr. X know these results. Liver function tests were normal. I asked the prison medical officer to let me know when this man would be discharged, and he has now been in touch with me to say that he will be going under the care of the probation office, Borough High Street, London SE1. I regret that we do not know the donor's address. I thought I would let you have this information so that you will be warned if he attends one of your blood collection sessions. So it looks from this that this is a letter that Dr. Smith is sending out to, it's not clear whether it's to one or more than one transfusion centres to warn them that this donor may attend a session, not knowing that he has tested positive for hepatitis B, or hepatitis Australia antigen. Can we then look at NHBT 0108717_001? So this is a letter from, again, Dr. Smith to, this time, Dr. Maycock, on the 28th of June 1972, and he says, I am enclosing information about the incidence of Australia antigen in the prison and forces population in Wessex. It looks to me as if we shall lose our prison population of donors eventually. And then he sets out the total tests and the antigen positives for the general public, HM forces, and HM prisons. So he, at this point, clearly considers that the number of antigen positives mean that they shall lose the prison population of donors eventually. But if we look at a document from...
Well, it makes the point beautifully, doesn't it, in terms of mathematics, because there are exactly the same number of antigen positive cases if you combine forces and prisons combined as there are in the general public. If you combine forces and prisons in total numbers, it's just over 4,000, which, again, multiply by 10, and you get to 40,000. So it's 10 times as likely on the basis of this, very rough,
Yes.
To find someone who's antigen positive in the forces or in prisons compared to the public.
Yes. Yes, quite.
I mean, it's only a snapshot. It's not rigorously statistical, but that's pretty clear.
And so just noting the date there, 28th of June 1972, and the suggestion that it looks like they'll lose their prison population of donors eventually. If we then look at a document from September 1983, NHBT 308628_001. That document doesn't seem to be opening. I don't know whether it's worth pursuing that or whether the best thing is to do to come back. Okay.
Well, yes.
I'm being told if we can wait 30 seconds, it can be put up.
Right, let's wait.
Thank you. So we can see here, East of Scotland Blood Transfusion Service, Scottish Transfusion Directors Meeting 13/9/83, telephoned survey of England and Wales transfusion centres regarding use of prison as a source of donor blood. And if we look down, the fourth centre down is Wessex. And they say it's several years since they stopped using the Isle of Wight prisons because of increasing medical problems among prisoners, particularly related to drugs, and the prisons cancelled sessions at 2 to 3 hour notice because of prison riots, demonstrations, etc. At present, they use Winchester prisons, a short-stay prison for non-violent prisoners once a year, but plan to withdraw this session in the near future. So it seems from this that there were still some sessions being undertaken as of September 1983, albeit plan to withdraw those in the near future, whatever quite that means.
What's the date of this, did you say?
September 1983.
Yeah.
I'm now going to turn to a handful of documents to look at the issues that arose in Wessex for provision of plasma for fractionation. We know that in 1980, and we've seen documents relating to this in previous hearings, that Wessex were providing plasma to PFL in Oxford for fractionation. And there are a series of meetings and correspondence that takes place between PFL, BPL and Wessex as to whether, and if so how, Wessex can increase their supply of plasma in return for more factor VIII. And if we can pick this up at CBLA 301198. This is a letter dated the 6th of November 1980 to Dr. Edith Bidwell, and it's from Dr. Smith. It sets out the history of this matter, and he says earlier, second paragraph down, earlier discussions with Dr. Lane and Dr. Gunson, former director of Oxford BTC, had been concerned with our desire to send more fresh plasma for fractionation to factor VIII and plasma protein faction to help with the supply of factor VIII to Alton. Of course, that's Lord Mayor Trelawn's. And then our sterile room being at capacity, our wish to send single transfer packs of FFP, and our intent to have a Class 1 clean room. After these preliminary talks and exchange of letters, a meeting was held at Southampton, and the statements below are extracted from the notes prepared by Dr. Bidwell. The date of the meeting was 25 June 1979, and then it sets out what was discussed at that meeting in terms of an agreement was reached about sending more packs each week to PFL in Oxford. And then if we turn over the page, we can see at the second paragraph down there, a meeting was arranged and held at Oxford on the 14th of March 1980. Those present were Dr. Lane, Dr. Bidwell, Dr. J. Smith, Mr. B. Grundy, Administrative Officer of Wessex, and Mr. Allison, Senior Chief MLSO, and myself. And we were told that Oxford were unable to increase their handling of plasma to 600 per week, which is what Dr. Smith thought had been agreed at the previous meeting, and that they were not entirely happy to process 500. Dr. Lane stated that even if we increased our plasma supply to BPL in 5-litre pools, there could be no pro rata increase of factor VIII, but in due course we would receive some PPF back. We had no alternative, therefore, but to cancel our arrangements about collecting more donations, for the revenue expenditure would have been about £170,000, with no factor VIII return on the investment. Subsequent to the above meeting, I wrote to Dr. Lane and received a reply which confirmed our understanding of the points made above. Then he goes on to say, as soon as fractionation plants are able to receive extra FFP, even in 5-litre packs, we will plan again to increase our donor intake. This has always been made perfectly clear. We now have a Class 1 clean room in operation, but naturally, like everyone else, we would like to send single transfer packs. So that was the position as at 14th of March 1980. Now this state of affairs, i.e. Wessex wanting to send more plasma for fractionation either to PFL or to BPL, was the subject of a letter that Dr. Arenstam published in the BMJ. And if we can have a look at that, it's RLIT 40667. It's dated 20th of September 1980, and the letter is on the right-hand column halfway down that page. And he's responding to some comments made by Dr. Cash. If we could go up a little bit. It's not terribly good. Yes, it's factor VIII supply and demand, sir. And then he sets out that he failed to, the reason he failed to mention the availability of plasma for fractionation as an important aspect of the problem of national self-sufficiency in blood products was because the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre has recently offered to increase the supply of plasma to the Lister Blood Products Laboratory, only to be told that there was not the capacity to handle the extra plasma. I think it most important that the I can't now read that. The repetitive cry, thank you, for increased plasma does not obscure the very real need for adequate fractionation potential in England today. Now, that letter prompted a rebuttal from Dr. Bidwell, which we see at CBLA 301193. So she, in response to that, wrote a letter to Dr. Arenstam, dated 29th of October 1980, referring in that first paragraph to the letter we've just looked at. And she puts has a rather different interpretation of events. She says this: the situation is that Wessex was unable to increase the provision of plasma to the BPL, to Blood Products Laboratory, in the agreed form, namely 5 litre packs, in conformity with all the other regional transfusion centres. So that's slightly different from how Dr. Smith was expressing himself in the letter that he wrote to her. And the letter Dr. Smith wrote to her is November 1980, so it's dated after this letter, but it recalls the events from his perspective prior to this letter being written. And she goes on to say this: the Plasma Fractionation Laboratory, Oxford, had begun to take plasma in single donations from the Oxford RTC in an effort to boost plasma intake from Oxford, in spite of the fact that the only method known to us of opening the present packs, developed at the New York Blood Centre, had serious drawbacks, not least the exposure of staff to most unpleasant working conditions, handling packs immediately after immersion in liquid nitrogen. This method is difficult enough on the relatively small scale of our operation at Oxford, and would be quite impractical on the scale of operation at BPL Elstree. Now, so my understanding of this is what she's referring to there is the 1 litre packs, but it's not entirely clear. Pending the ability of Oxford RTC to supply plasma up to the limit of the capacity of the Plasma Fractionation Laboratory, I had the support of my staff in volunteering to accept sufficient single donations from Wessex to absorb our spare capacity. This offer was made in the light of the long association between Oxford and Lord Mayor Treloar College, and our appreciation of the special difficulties its situation causes the Wessex region, not dissimilar to the special difficulties in Oxford. Our limited ability to open single packs was made clear to Dr. Smith from the beginning. Nevertheless, as soon as we started to accept the single donations from Wessex, Dr. Smith ceased to send any 5 litre packs to BPL Elstree and put the whole burden of fractionation on his plasma production for factor VIII concentrate onto this small laboratory at Oxford. It was hardly surprising that he rapidly outstripped the small amount of spare capacity we had offered. Moreover, despite an initial undertaking to supply plasma from blood collected into CPD anticoagulant, he switched to ACD, which gives a lower yield for the same amount of work from our staff. It was because he was offering plasma in a non-standard form that he was told there was not the capacity to handle the extra plasma. And so on that point there of the lower yield, using the anticoagulant ACD rather than CPD. We don't need to look at this, but there is a document authored by Dr. Jim Smith, CBLA 00120012, which says, in his view, that the loss of yield is 15%. So Dr. Bidwell there putting a rather different slant on this issue than that reflected by Dr. Smith in his letter we looked at.
Can I just draw breath there for a moment? I'm a little puzzled by the dates, because you began this plasma fractionation by taking me to CBLA 301198. Could we just have that back up again? And the date of that is the 6th of November,
Yes.
1980.
Yes.
So all the documents you've shown me since came before that.
They do. So this
is the last word, is it?
Well, this is the last word, and the reason I took you to it first is because it sets out 2 earlier meetings, and it's the only record that I found of those 2 earlier meetings. So
I see.
It sets out the meeting, sets out earlier discussions, and then a meeting on the 25th of June 1979.
Well, we just scroll down and we can see that, perhaps.
You can see that at the halfway down. After little 4. So after these preliminary talks and exchange of letters, a meeting was held at Southampton, and that's 25th June 1979. And then if we go over the page 2, we can then see the second paragraph down there, a meeting was arranged and held in Oxford on the 14th of March 1980. And so that was the reason, sir, that I took you to that.
Right. So the dates in date order was the 14th of March 1980 really is where this particular exchange kicked off.
Exactly.
Because that was interpreted, as it appears to be stated here, as saying, you can give us all you like, but we can't cope with it. With some issue between the 5 litre pools and the 1 litre, but saying here clearly that it doesn't matter if it's 5 litre or 1 litre, we can't cope with it.
Yes.
And the correspondence then followed.
Indeed.
Arguing about aspects of that.
Indeed.
I follow. Thank you for that.
So the matter resolves itself after the 1st of April 1982, once the pro rata arrangements were introduced, and Wessex was able to continue to send single donations to PFL, and received an assurance from BPL that if they sent plasma in 5 litre packs, factor concentrates would be returned on a pro rata basis. And we don't need to go to that, but that's set out and confirmed in correspondence between Dr. Smith and Dr. Lane. For example, in a letter dated the 13th of March 1982, for the transcript, BPLL 40901_001. And then shortly after that, arrangements appear to have changed again when Wessex stopped sending plasma altogether to PFL, instead sending all their plasma to BPL. And so we know from other material, and again we've looked at this, some of this material in other hearings, that the pro rata system was not applied strictly to Wessex because of the extra responsibility that it had for supplying the Lord Mayor Trelaw's school. So a special allocation was made to Wessex to account for this on top of what it received under the pro rata system. So if we then turn to NHBT 0111301, we can have again another snapshot of what's going on in Wessex in 1988. So we've got the date at the top there, 20th of October 88. This is an internal memo from Dr. Smith to Dr. Herborn, who we know from Dr. Bolton's evidence was one of the consultant haematologists at the centre, Dr. Allison, who was the MLSO, and then Dr. J. Smith from BPL, the use and supply of factor VIII, and it says there an estimate of the clinical use of factor VIII, and if we go down the page there, we can see that a number of different haemophilia centres are set out there. And while it says it's an estimate at the top there, if one looks at the NHS factor 8Y international units per month has a star by it, as does commercial factor 8 international units per month has 2 stars by it. And if we look down the page, we can see that that appears to be, rather than an estimate, a sample from the actual figures, January to September 88, calculated as 8 months, and sample from first 6 months, 1987 to 88. It's not entirely clear to me what sample means, because of the date of this document is October 1988. Presumably they had the actual figures, but it doesn't also seem to correlate with how one might describe an estimate. Anyway, I think the point to take from this page, if we go back up so we can see all of the different haemophilia centres, that the Lord Mayor Trelaw's school is by far the biggest user of factor VIII, both in terms of NHS factor VIII and in terms of commercial. And then if we go down to the bottom of that page, we can see that the BPL estimate we should receive the following amount of factor VIII, and it's split in the months October 88 to March 99 between the Wessex RTC and Lord Mayor Trelaw's. Wessex RTC getting the bulk of it, Lord Mayor Trelaw's getting some of it. So clearly some of Wessex, quite a lot of Wessex's material would be going to Lord Mayor Treloar's in 1988. And then if we turn over the page, we get some information about policy. The aim would be, in the first instance, to wipe out the commercial factor rate budget for all hospitals except Lord Mayor Treloar. If supplies of factor rate Y increased further, the LMT budget could then be reduced. So we can see that the policy is Lord Mayor Treloar's to remain on commercial longer than the other haemophilia centres. That's somewhat different from other policies we've seen, where often children are given precedence for NHS factor concentrates. Here we have the opposite. If there's no further increase in demand for factor rate, we should be self-sufficient by December 1988, and then it sets out what the stock is at present. Moving on then to the arrangements for distribution of concentrates. We know from the documentation we've seen that prior to December 1976, BPL was sending concentrates directly to the haemophilia centres in the Wessex area. But from December, this was sent to the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre. That was the plan, and we don't need to look at this, but we can see this for the transcript from CBLA 304553, although, of course, the document that we've just seen from 1988 makes it clear that still some product was being sent directly to Lord Mayor Treloar's in 1988. If we look at CBLA 301456, we can see a little bit more about this. So this is a document from the Advisory Committee on the NBTS issue of factor 8 via RTCs, and we can see at the top right-hand corner AC Advisory Committee brackets 81. That's 1981 as we understand it, and then it's said to be a summary of information received from regional transfusion directors. And so we've looked at this in previous hearings. If we turn over to page 2, we can see the title there, Issue of Factor 8 via RTCs, Summary of Information Received from Regional Transfusion Centre Directors, and the region is set down on the left-hand column. Transfusion Centre holds Factor 8 is the first column, then other products, then whose budget, then comments. And if we go over to page 3, we can see what's said about Wessex. So under the column, Transfusion Centre holds Factor 8, yes. Other products, no. Whose budget, RHA, brackets separate from RTCs, and comments, encountered difficulties in coping with haemophilia centre directors' individual preferences for particular brands of Factor 8 and getting haemophilia centres to operate within their budgets. What precisely that means, we may have a bit more information in relation to that if we look at OXUH 303752 _ 005. No, that I don't think is the right. No, I didn't mean to take that one up. Sorry, can we try this one? IPSN 40331-008. Mistake. So we can see here this is a meeting in 1978, so it predates the document we just looked at by a few years. But it's the note of a meeting with Dr. Arenstram by a sales person, a sales representative from Hyatt. And what it says in the second paragraph is this: all orders for the Wessex area are processed through the buying officer.
Just pause. I was told, I think, during the Trelaw's presentation that this was a Spaywood rep.
Can we go to the bottom of the...
And the initials DW, I think, may appear at the bottom, which would tend to confirm that. Let's have a look.
yes, so the initials are DRW.
Yes, so that's the chief exec of Spaywood.
I beg your pardon, sir. That yes. Yes. Yes, DRW and CC'd to Mr. D. Heath.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the. Thank you. So if we look at the second paragraph there, we can see second paragraph from the top. All orders for the Wessex area are processed through the buying office in Winchester, but Arenstam makes the decisions as he is by far the biggest user. His first requirement is convenience of administration, since they often have 15 infusions to give at a time. The 6-month study of all commercial concentrates last year showed haemophil and factorate to be better than coate in this respect. In his opinion, solubility is slower with our product. It is worth going back if we can provide evidence to the contrary. So it may be that the reference in the table that we just looked at to having difficulties with haemophilia centre directors. Let me just get the precise wording for that. I've lost the...
It's CBLA 301456, page 3.
The precise wording of that document, thank you.
So CBLA 301456, page 3.
Yes, so encountering. So what's said in page 3 of that document is that the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre appeared to be encountering difficulties with coping with haemophilia centre directors' individual preferences for particular brands of factor VIII and getting haemophilia centres to operate within their budgets. It may be that that's a reference to Dr. Arenstam, and we will see. We can see from a document I'm just about to take you to. That Dr. Arenstam does indeed express difficulties, that he is having difficulties in operating within his budget. So we can see, if we look at OXUH 303752_005, this was the document I went to earlier. It's a meeting from the 19th of June 1978. Haemophilia Centre directors, regional transfusion centre directors in the Supra region in Oxford. And we can see it just second from the bottom is Dr. Smith attending. But if we go, please, to page 4 of this, there's a section which deals with supply of therapeutic materials. We can see here, second paragraph down there, Dr. Arenstam said that he was encountering problems because of the change of policy over ordering commercial factor VIII. Initially, he had ordered the commercial factor VIII on prescription directly from commercial firms, but now he had to get it via his regional blood transfusion centre and budget ahead for how much he would need. He did not think he would be able to manage within his budget. Dr. Smith is then recorded as saying he did not think that there was any problem in the Wessex region apart from the one at Alton, next page, which was a special case because of the large number of haemophilic boys at the college. He was waiting the DHS's reply to a request for official recognition of the special situation at Alton. Sticking then with the supply to Trelaw's, but going back to 1974 and seeing how the situation changed, if we could go please to OXUH 40652. We can see a letter 30th of April 1974 to the Department of Health and social security. And we don't need to look at it, but we will see when we turn over, we go to page 2, that it's from Dr. Arenstam, and it says this on page 1. It sets out on page 1 the background to Lord Mayor Treloar's, and notes that, if we go to page 1, and notes in that first paragraph there are 50 severely affected haemophiliac boys residing there. During 1973, the centre used 900 units of factor VIII, approximately 650 units as cryoprecipitate, 50,000 units as fresh frozen plasma, and 20,000 units as human and animal concentrate.
I think just for the sake of the transcript, the 900 is 900,000, isn't it?
Sorry, yes.
The 650 is 650,000. The reason I mention it is because it's comparing the 50,000 and 200,000, I think you're going to take us to.
Our official supply from the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre at Southampton is the equivalent of 10,000 bags of cryoprecipitate, or 182 bags per week throughout the year. I have been repeatedly told by Dr. Smith that this is the absolute maximum production he is able to make available for me. And then Dr. Arenstam goes on to explain what he needs to do in order to find the excess material that he needs. He says in the next paragraph down, I've had to obtain this extra material from a variety of sources, often at very short notice and at great difficulty to both myself and the sources. I've had to beg for materials from other transfusion centres. And I have had to, at the bottom of the paragraph, I've had to, when all else has failed, buy off the commercial market, and have spent £1,000 in the past year. This situation is quite impossible. We are never able to plan ahead, and there is always the danger that our sources, entirely unofficial, will dry up, leaving our large pool of haemophilic boys without any reserve therapeutic material for emergencies. And then over the page, he says that he has calculated that on the commercial market, the shortfall of factor VIII would cost £26,000 annually, and that it's imperative that supplies are guaranteed because they're looking after boys from all over the country, and it should be regarded as a national service. So that was what Dr. Arenstam was telling the DHSS in 1974. If we then go on to 1978, to CBLA 40745, we can see a letter written from Dr. Arenstam to Dr. Stafford, a consultant haematologist at the Plymouth General Hospital, 14th of March 1978. And he says that this in the second paragraph, your comments about the therapy which X enjoyed whilst he was with us provided much food for thought. You may be interested to hear that we now use prophylaxis routinely in my clinical situations, and we feel that it can be of positive benefit when some of our boys are going through difficult patches. We are obviously more fortunate than you in that the Wessex region is supplying us with all the material we need for our admittedly enthusiastic programme. The climate with regard to prophylaxis appears to be changing, and I do hope the wind of change blows your way fairly soon. So we can see within that 4-year period, Dr. Arenstam's view that the supply problems he's experienced in 1974 appear to have sorted themselves, even for what he describes as his admittedly enthusiastic programme of prophylaxis. So moving on then to the material that we have in relation to donor selection with respect to hepatitis. We can see from NHBT 0108678 that there is communication and correspondence between the Wessex Centre and the Department of Public Health at the City of Portsmouth. So this is a letter 25th of May 1971 from a Dr. Rhodes, And he says this from Dr. Smith to Dr. Rhodes. And Dr. Smith says this: "I'm pleased that you will be able to help us about cases who may be blood donors. Towards the end of this year, we hope to start testing all our donors for the presence of hepatitis-associated antigen, and we will be able to discontinue that request. I'm pleased that you will be able to help us about cases who may be blood donors. Towards the end of this year, we hope to start testing all our donors for the presence of hepatitis-associated antigen, and we may well be able to discontinue the request that we have made to you." And what I understand from the documents that this refers to is the request made by Wessex for those that are investigating cases of notified infectious hepatitis to make inquiries as to whether or not they are blood donors, or indeed any of those that have been in close contact with them are blood donors, and then passing that information on to the Wessex Regional Transfusion Centre. And we have examples of notifications being made by the County Medical Officer of Hampshire, so not just the City of Portsmouth Department of Public Health, but the County Medical Officer of Hampshire, and we don't need to go to those, but for the transcript, one such example is NHBT 0108548. Now, we know from material that the inquiry has seen and indeed looked at in previous hearings that the recommendation, a recommendation was made by the in the second report of the advisory group on testing for the presence of hepatitis B surface antigen and its antibody with respect to the whether or not those with a history of hepatitis needed to be could in fact give remain on the donor panel as long as they had not suffered a bout of jaundice within the previous 12 months. And we know from, and again we don't need to go to this, but we know from NHBT 0109112 that Dr. Smith was notified about this recommendation by Dr. Maycock on the 13th of June 1975. Now, it seems that Dr. Smith, we have a memo from January 1977 from Dr. Smith, which relates to this, and that's NHBT 0108668. And could we go to page 5, please, of this document? So we have here Wessex RTC, donors with a history of jaundice. And if we go to page 7, the end of that memo, we can see it's from Dr. Smith. It's distributed to all team leaders, team clerks, drivers, haemoglobinists, and to medical staff. And it's dated 21st of January 1977. So if we go then back, please, to page 5, he sets out the background that we've been asked to change our procedure at blood collection sessions, and refers to the circular that appends the second report of the group, of the advisory group. Not to exclude from panels donors with a history of jaundice, provided the donor has not suffered from hepatitis or jaundice during the previous 12 months. And then he sets out the background. He says this: since 1963, as a precautionary measure, we have not taken donations from persons giving a history of jaundice or hepatitis, other than a history of neonatal jaundice or a history of obstructive jaundice, or who have been in close contact with a case of hepatitis in the past 6 months. And then, due to the discovery of a sensitive test for Australia antigen and a better understanding of the illness, we have been asked to change our rules. Both types of hepatitis can be transmitted by transfusion, although type A is usually spread by the fecal-oral route and type B by injection of blood. And then if we go over the page, halfway down that page, he talks about type B serum hepatitis and the incubation period. But if we pick it up at the end of that paragraph, we find that in Wessex, about 1 in 2,000 donors have a positive test Australia antigen with no history of jaundice. Only about 2% of persons will give a history of jaundice, and I would like to suggest that in the first instance, after you've considered this matter, and if you are agreeable, that we should, 1, test for Australia antigen each prospective donor who gives a history of jaundice or hepatitis longer ago than 12 months. A 5 ml clotted sample will be required, and a 2.5 ml EDTA sample will be taken at the same time to estimate the hemoglobin level, and then a finger prick test. And then if we go over the page, if the Australia antigen test is negative and the hemoglobin is satisfactory, the donor could then be called to a later session. So those with a history of jaundice will, more than 12 months ago, will have this sample taken from them, and then, if negative, called back. Those with a history of jaundice within 12 months will be deferred. And then we can see that the procedure changes again in 1982, NHBT 0144439. Where in another internal memo, it said this: donors with a medical history of jaundice, the procedure dealing with the potential donors with a medical history of jaundice or hepatitis has been reviewed and alterations have been agreed. With effect from 1st January 82, the practice of taking samples only from those donors will cease. Instead, they will be regarded as ordinary donors and will be dealt with in exactly the same way as new donors, both at donor sessions and in the laboratories. And then at paragraph 2, donor selection will remain as it is, i.e. reject if a history of jaundice or hepatitis within the previous 12 months or a history of close contact within the previous 6 months. But otherwise, treat as in exactly the same way as ordinary donors. Now, we know from a letter that Dr. Smith wrote to the Lister Institute on the 4th of October 1971, which we don't need to go to, but is NHBT 0107890, that they started testing donations at Wessex for hepatitis B on the 4th of October 1971. I think it is worth looking at NHBT 0108997, which is a memo from Dr. Smith to Dr. Barnes in relation to fresh blood labels, and it's dated 13th of December 1971. And it says this: until the testing of blood donations for HAA became more accurate, until the testing of blood donations for HAA becomes more accurate and specific, I do not think that we should alter the fresh blood group labels in any way. The test at the moment is only 40% effective, and I would not like the clinicians to believe that a patient could not contract transfusion hepatitis after being given HAA negative blood using our present test. So it seems that an inquiry may have been made as to whether or not something should be put on the fresh blood to suggest that it had been tested for HAA, and Dr. Smith is saying no, because the tests are not terribly effective. So just a couple more documents before perhaps we take a short break. Moving on to the question of HIV, just looking at the information that we have about Wessex's experience of the first 6 months of the first AIDS leaflet. Could we look at, please, at CBLA 301820? And this, again, is a table we've looked at on a number of occasions. We can see Southampton at the bottom column there. It says distribution method, distributed with call-up cards August 83 to February 84, now available at sessions, number used 71,700, stock 3,300. And then under donor response effect on attendance, nil. And on other comments, it says 3 homosexual donors as for... it says as for advice. I suspect it means asked for advice.
Well, it looks as though the right-hand margin is missing further up the page, so
Yes.
I think you're probably right.
Yes. And we get a little bit more information about this from a letter sent to Dr. Smithies from Dr. Smith, which is at DHSC 010-1658_014. And this is a letter dated the 24th of January 1985. And he says, we display a poster at our blood collection sessions together with a notice at the team clerk's desk. And in addition, we have altered the MBTS Form 110 to draw attention to AIDS. I think a national poster would be very useful. And when the new AIDS leaflet arrives, we intend to send this to all our donors with their call-up card. And then lastly, sir, before taking a break, is a letter from Dr. Smith, again to Dr. Smithies, about HIV testing, DHSC 0002285_013. And this is a letter dated 29th of October 1985. Thank you for your letter about HTLV3 antibody testing of blood donations and blood components. Our stocks in the centre and in the hospital blood banks were all negative for the above antibody on the 14th of October 1985. This includes fresh flows in plasma and cryoprecipitate. So he seems to be suggesting that they had tested all of those products by 14th of October 1985. And then he goes on to say something about heat-treated factor products. As you know, we are only using heat-treated factor 8 for the treatment of haemophilia, and I have mentioned to our local haematologist the problems that might be present with intravenous immunoglobulin. So that is the material that I wanted to draw your attention to in relation to the Wessex Centre. After the break, I'm going to turn to the HIV contamination incident. I know the inquiry has heard some information and evidence in relation to that in previous hearings, but I will go through the material that we have from the Wessex perspective in relation to that.
Yes. Well, let's take a break then, and what do you suggest, quarter of an hour?
Yes, so that would be...
So quarter of an hour, and I hope that gives those who are listening remotely time for a proper break. So we'll come back, shall we, at 11:20.